Good morning, everyone. It's a delight to be with you all today at this exciting conference. Many thanks to all of the organizers. And by way of background, I've been working in China for 30 years, beginning with a stint with the UN, where I was actually in the room when China first stepped up to the climate negotiation stage as the voice of the developing world. And I began NRDC's clean energy program in 1996, which was the first clean energy program in China to be launched by an international NGO. And as you've heard already, I wrote a book recently on China's climate, clean energy, and environmental futures called Will China Save the Planet? And I will be talking more about that later today if you are interested. So the increased frequency and severity and unpredictability of weather events caused by climate change are a real threat to China and its population and its economy, as well as to its energy systems. According to China's own climate scientists, China is particularly vulnerable to droughts, heavy rains, heat waves, and flooding caused by melting glaciers. And changing rainfall patterns, as you heard Ali mention earlier, are going to raise a severe threat to China's Three Gorges Dam and other hydropower installations. Three Gorges Dam is the world's largest. And it's particularly important for China because hydropower is China's second largest energy source. China's vulnerability to sea level rise is especially acute because more than 550 million people live in China's coastal provinces, one of the most densely populated regions on Earth. So what is China doing to increase its energy resiliency? And just, you see here, there's two major utilities in China. China's state grid is the world's largest utility. It supplies electricity to more than 1 billion people and covers 88% of the world's territory. It's actually the second largest corporation in the world after Walmart. And unlike Walmart, it's a state-owned enterprise, with the head of it having ministerial rank. Same for the southern grid that covers the remaining part of the territory. And these utilities understand the need for increasing energy resilience. In March, the Southern Grid announced that they're going to spend $25 billion over the next few years to improve its transmission system and increase its resilience to natural disasters and reduce power outages. But the state grid has focused its efforts on an initiative they announced about a decade ago called the Strong Smart Grid. And the concept is that the state grid wants to connect all of the country's regional power networks using ultra-high voltage transmission lines into a strong and smart national network. And just since 2006, China has built over 19 of these multi-billion-dollar UHV lines. Last April, it opened the world's first 1,100 kilowatt ultra-high voltage direct current line that stretches 2,000 miles across the country and has a transmission capability of 12 million kilowatts. Now, one of the main reasons for these ultra-high voltage network is to improve the transmission of renewable energy from the north and west sparsely populated regions of China to its demand centers on the east. That has not yet been fully realized. China still faces a lot of challenges in order to do and realize those goals, including, oddly enough, local protectionism, which we, of course, familiar with here in the United States. But those provinces in the east don't necessarily want to buy power from other provinces. And in terms of the connection, the focus these days is more on strengthening the regional grids rather than that interconnection. But we shall see what the future holds. China's moving ahead quite strongly with the smart part of the strong smart grid as well. It is working to roll out a national smart grid system by 2021 that is going to use big data to connect the grid, households, home appliance manufacturers, electric vehicle charging networks, and the solar energy system. China already leads the world in smart meter deployment. Actually, 70% of the world's smart meters are in China. And China is now integrating smart technology into its substations in order to develop a more efficient and flexible national grid. But you just heard from the last speaker about the need to reduce demand. And shortly after I started NRDC's clean energy program in China, and continuing for a decade, we've been advocating in China for policies that require the utilities to use a portion of their revenue to improve energy efficiency programs for their customers. And at the end of 2010, we were delighted that 6 national agencies, led by the State Council, did in fact issue utility demand-side management regulations in China that require utilities to reduce efficiency for their customers, to spend a certain percentage of their revenue to do so, and also to reduce their load. So the regulations also called for integrated resource planning, something we've been pushing in the US for many years, that requires utilities to consider demand as well as supply as resources in their energy planning, and actually to give priority to demand reduction. So that is continuing apace. Yet, 2/3 of China's electricity still comes from coal, though that's down from 80% in 2010. But the winds of change are blowing, and China now leads the world not just in manufacturing of solar panel and wind turbines, but in installation and generation. They have more than twice as much renewable energy capacity as any other nation. And right now, 1 out of every 3 wind turbines in the world is in China. And more than 1 out of 3 solar panels is in China. China is also the leading investor in renewable energy. In 2017, it invested more than the next 3 investors together. That would be the US, the EU, and Japan put together. And last year, even though China is reducing subsidies for solar and wind, mostly because its work has been the leading contributor to a reduction in solar prices by 94% over the last decade, they're cutting the subsidies because they're not needed anymore. And even so, last year, China invested twice as much as the US in solar. Right now, about 1/4 of China's total electricity production comes from renewable energy, a lot of that from hydro. But China recently upped its renewable energy portfolio standard to 35% by 2030. And that obligation has to be met by every provincial and regional power generation, as well as provinces and companies. Most of China's solar is utility scale, but distributed generation is also growing rapidly. And in accordance with the 13th current 5-year plan, China will have at least 60 gigawatts of distributed solar PV by 2020, and 100 demonstration zones throughout the country where 100% of new building rooftops and 50% of existing building rooftops will be covered with solar panels. So they've issued a series of incentive programs and tax breaks in order to move that target along. But again, because the cost has been coming down so much, China is cutting the subsidies for distributed solar as well, including twice since January. So this has introduced a lot of uncertainty into the market. But what China is trying to do for all of its energy sources, including coal, including nuclear, is to introduce competition, to require solar and wind to compete on a level playing field with these other energy sources. And they are starting to win. Microgrids is another important factor. As we've heard before, China's research and development on microgrids began in 2010. And the current targets call for 28 microgrid development, the demonstration projects by next year. But the object of these is really not to increase resiliency as it is in the US. It's really to demonstrate technology, demonstrate clean energy technology. And the major drivers are really the central government and the local utility. So China still has a long way to go to realize the potential of microgrids. Energy storage, another key factor. An interesting story, because in last year, energy storage in China just had an unprecedented growth spurt, 440% growth, including the accumulation of over 16 gigawatts of capacity, breakthroughs in large-scale grid-side energy storage applications, and proliferation of energy storage just about anywhere you could think of: wind farms, PV stations, power grids, telecommunications, logistics, and shipping. Yet much of that growth has come to a halt in this year, the first half of 2019, and it's pretty much a direct result of a decision by Chinese government that utility companies could not recoup the cost of these energy storage systems in their transmission and distribution power price. So even the state grid is putting on ice some of its energy storage programs. So we're trying, to help this along, but it's going to require some real innovative thinking on how to get a profit from that, bring the costs down. China's doing a lot of R&D on energy storage battery prices, and look at innovative methods such as shared energy storage. Another way China's leading the clean energy revolution is through electric vehicles. Just in the last few years, China invested $60 billion in subsidies, in electric vehicle charging stations, in government procurement, and now leads the world in electric vehicle development. 45% of the world's electric cars are in China, 98% of the world's electric buses, and half of the world's electric vehicle charging infrastructure. And again, China's efforts and money that they have poured into this have helped bring down the cost of electric vehicle batteries by 85% since 2010. So how can the electric vehicle revolution support grid resiliency? Shout out to ABB. They have a demonstration project with an electric bus company in China to develop flash chargers, almost instantaneous chargers of electric buses that could be used to help with managed charging of electric vehicle buses at times of peak demand or renewable energy. And so they're developing a demonstration project hope to have it running by the first half of next year. But in the meantime, NRDC has been working with the Shanghai Electric Company, with the electric vehicle company NIO, which some people call China's Tesla, and the Shanghai government and some charging service providers on a very exciting pilot project in which electric vehicles actually do participate in demand response. And it's a great opportunity to help electric vehicle owners adjust their electric capacity charging programs and patterns to help the power grid increase efficiency and integrate more renewables. So we have completed our data collection last month. We hope to come out with a report by the end of this year with recommendations for the Shanghai government, which has already said that they are planning to use the results of our report to develop relevant policies. So as I said before, I'm giving a talk at 3 p.m. in the Nicholas School Granger Hall. If you'd like to learn more, please join me and find out more about whether China will save the planet. Thank you very much.